All right, chapter 27 really bounces off chapter 26. And a lot of the material I've actually already gone through in chapter 26. So most of this will be a review, a short portion or short description of certain things that I feel are really important to re-emphasize to go along with chapter 26. Remember that we need to maintain proper levels of water and electrolytes to promote nervous and muscular system control. Too much or too little of both are extremely bad and have some very serious repercussions. So let's get into this. So half of your body mass and or weight is about 50% water. It fluctuates depending on your male or female, your age. So there is fluctuation, so we'll just say about half, okay? Two categories of where this water is found is first, intracellular fluid, intra, that means fluid inside the cell. That fluid inside the cell is known as cytoplasm. This is where most of that water is stored. And it's roughly about 65% of that total water volume is stored in the intracellular fluid, the fluid found within cells. And that makes sense because of the number of cells we have in our body. The second category is going to be extracellular fluid. That is the fluid found outside of the cells, everything else. Extracellular fluid is about the 35%. So 65% was found in intracellular fluid, roughly 35% is found as extracellular fluid. So any fluid found outside of the cell is contained in this category of extracellular fluid. Within that category of extracellular fluid, you have interstitial fluid. That is an extracellular fluid. Okay, interstitial fluid means the fluid between cells. Then also part of extracellular fluid is going to be blood plasma. That is the liquid portion of blood. Also within this extracellular fluid, under that category, besides, so this is category 1. This is category 2. This is part of category 2. This is part of category 2. This is part of category 2. Another part of category 2, is going to be lymph, LYMPH. So another category, another thing under is lymph. And lastly, under extracellular fluid would be like synovial fluid. Remember the fluid found between joints, and also cerebral spinal fluid. Those both are major contributors to holding water. So again, intracellular fluid, fluid within the cell, extracellular fluid, fluid found everywhere else. And that everywhere else includes interstitial fluid, plasma, lymph, synovial fluid, and cerebral spinal fluid, or CSF. Fluid is not solely water. It must have an ion component called electrolytes. Okay? Potassium and protein are in the highest amounts in intracellular fluid. So potassium and protein are found in the highest amounts in your body within cells. Sodium, or Na, and Cl are found in the highest amounts in extracellular fluid, everywhere else in the body. So intracellularly, you're going to have your protein and your potassium. So here's your cell. You're going to have sodium, which is Na. And you're also going to have protein, and I'm just going to put P. Everywhere else, whether it's interstitial, plasma, lymphatic system, cerebral spinal fluid, that's where you're going to have this is supposed to be, I'm sorry, I'm doing two things at once. Apologies. Let me erase that. Okay. Let me try this again. So inside the cell, I knew I made a mistake. You're going to have potassium, which is K, and protein at the highest levels. That's intracellular. Everything else is going to contain high levels of sodium and chloride. Okay, that's correct. Okay, water must be regulated and moved to where the body needs both water and electrolytes. It is mostly moved by osmosis or simple diffusion of water towards an area with high solute concentration. Well, think about it. High solute concentration. You're used to saying here in diffusion is movement of water from high to low gradient. Think of it this way. You want water to dilute or contain that solute. So water is going to move where solute concentrations are high so it can dilute it. So diffusion of water is going to move to the area of high solute concentrations. So let's say this is a membrane, right? That's a membrane. And let's say Na is high here, very high. So that means the solute concentration of sodium is high. So what's going to happen? Water is going to move by osmosis in that direction to reduce the solute concentration. This is to prevent dehydration. Water must remain constant. Remember homeostasis. What enter must equal what exit. So the water present inside your body must stay the same as the water exiting. It can't fluctuate. If the volume changes, it will affect the cardiovascular system, blood pressure. It can affect respiratory changes. It can change the pressure gradient, the movement of fluid. So anytime you fluctuate water, it can affect several areas of the body. So what is the body's response? Well, sweat or thirst. Remember, sweat is losing water. Drinking is sustaining or maintaining or responding to that thirst. See, a lot of this is review. There goes another negative feedback loop for thirst. Thirst causes, or its outcome is to drink. This only occurs when there is a drop in 10 to 15% of water within your body. So let's go through this negative feedback of thirst. If water is low, so we're first starting with water being low. Then the hypothalamus detects solute levels being high. Think about it, water's low, so solutes have to be high. So hypothalamus detects that the solute levels are high. What does it do in response? Because you know it's got to respond to this. Remember, that is humoral stimulus, where ions dictate the release of hormones. So the hypothalamus is going to do two things. Number one, it's going to release antidiuretic hormone because if water's low, you don't want to urinate a lot of water. So the hypothalamus is going to release antidiuretic hormone, which its target tissue is the kidney, specifically step 2 in that urine production, where water is pulled from the proximal tubule and put back into the blood volume. So still with water low, the hypothalamus is going to release antidiuretic hormone, which is going to cause step 2 where water is put back into blood volume. That'll increase water. Also, with that water being low, that the hypothalamus is going to trigger that thirst. That idea that you need to quench that thirst. You need to drink water. So that's when water is low. When water is high, so this is ADH. first. This mouse thing sucks. Okay? When water is high, then the hypothalamus detects that solute levels are low. So the hypothalamus is involved in this. So what does the hypothalamus do? It stops or reduces antidiuretic hormone, which means the kidneys are going to push more water out through the urine. See that negative feedback? Right? Good, good. Make sure you understand that. So, blood osmolarity regulation. Okay, pretty simple. It's homeostasis based. Remember, it's that balancing act. Okay, so first, homeostasis must be changed by a stimulus. Something causes it, right? So homeostasis is changed by a stimulus. It can either be a stimulus that increases blood osmolarity or decreases blood osmolarity. Either or whatever stimulus it is going to be responded to or realized by the osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. And you know that because I just talked about the negative feedback of thirst. So again, for A, you have your stimulus. And I'm just going to put S. So first thing is a stimulus. It's going to change the levels of water and or ions. This is going to be detected by osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. Well, in a normal, healthy individual, whenever you have a stimulus, you must have a response. So the second thing after the stimulus is you have that response. Remember, the hypothalamus now realized or was stimulated by osmoreceptors that there was something going on. So the response is done by effectors. Either increase or decrease, the effector is always going to be the kidney. And I'll just do this way to kind of help. Stimulus to hypothalamus. Response to kidneys. Okay? This is a stimulus response system for blood osmolarity. Okay, so this is the slide that I'm going to say the most on. So this is intra versus extracellular regulation. This is regulation of water and electrolytes. And let me start with extracellular first. Extracellular regulation is very important because direct correlation between blood volume and blood pressure. Correlation means link. So there's a direct link between level of water and electrolytes and blood volume and blood pressure. So blood pressure and blood volume, there's a direct link based on water and electrolytes. For example, if blood volume increases, then blood pressure should increase. You can see where this can be very dangerous. Okay? In extracellular regulation, it is done by one of three ways. So regulation for extracellular water and electrolyte balance can be done one in three ways. One is neural, the brain. So neural regulation is where it detects venous blood pressure and it causes glomerular filtration rate to change, to regulate it. Again, there is a neural detection of venous blood pressure and it causes the GFR to respond. Remember myogenic response, an extrinsic response, the saying that the body can respond to issues within your body, that forcing or allowing plasma into the glomerulus or decreasing the amount entering the glomerulus. Remember that squeezing by the smooth muscle around the blood vessels? Kind of like if you have a garden hose, turn it wide open, it's going through. I squeeze it. If I acted like a smooth muscle and I kink it, then water stops flowing. Same kind of idea. So that's a neural response to extracellular regulation. The second response to extracellular regulation, or how it can be done, is also an extrinsic method where it is enzyme and hormones working. So involved with this second way is going to be renin, which is an enzyme, angiotensin. Think about angioangina, that has to do with the heart, and tensin, tension. Okay, angiotensin, which is a hormone, and aldosterone. All three of these are involved with increasing blood pressure. How? Well, there are cells called juxtaglomerular cells. Juxtaglomerular cells. These juxtaglomerular cells, juxta means next to, so juxtaglomerular cells are found next to the glomerulus. These cells, these juxtaglomerular cells, detect blood pressure decreasing and release the enzyme renin. Renin causes angiotensin, that hormone, to convert or change into angiotensin 1. The production of angiotensin 1 cause the change or the product angiotensin 2. Angiotensin is a peptide which acts on smooth muscle and increases blood pressure. Again, it's extrinsic. It's involved with a myogenic response. So that's 1 and 2, neural, and then we'll call it hormone enzyme change. The final extracellular regulation way is called atrial natriuretic hormone, or ANH. N is no. Atrial natriuretic hormone. When blood volume is too high, it causes stress on atrial walls, which causes the release of ANH. ANH causes kidneys to increase urination. So again, the 3 ways to regulate extracellular is neural, hormones and enzymes, and the third is ANH, atrial natriuretic hormone. Now, we've finished extracellular regulation. Intracellular is a lot easier, a lot less. Okay, so intracellular regulation, remember, intra is inside the cell that is gated by a plasma membrane. Remember, the plasma membrane allows only certain things into and out of it. Remember, it's selectively permeable. Remember, I said before, potassium and protein levels are higher inside the cell, in that cytoplasm. Okay, that is because protein is large and is synthesized inside the cell. Remember, gene activation, direct gene activation, and even second messenger, a way to produce a new protein, and the protein is synthesized within that cell. That was that final step for both. Okay, so protein is synthesized inside of the cell, and it can't leave or diffuse out. It's too big. Okay? Movement of anything large requires ATP and movement by the sodium-potassium pump. This helps when solute levels outside the cell increase. That promotes water to leave inside the cell to outside. Remember, water is always going to move to an area of higher concentration of solutes. Okay, So there's regulation of ions, and I made it pretty straightforward and simplified to help. I mean, you should have read the chapter, but let me just highlight some of the important things. So extracellular ions should stay the same unless needed by body, like for growth or for a trauma situation. Okay, so here are the different ions that are regulated. Sodium. The highest amount, remember, is in extracellular fluid. Remember, water always follows salt. So, antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone are hormones that aid in the regulation of sodium. Remember, sodium is a cation. It has a positive charge. And those aldosterone and antidiuretic hormones, their target tissue are kidneys. So sodium, if we need sodium out, then remember that we want to urine more. So we release aldosterone. If we need sodium to stay in the body, part of the blood volume, then antidiuretic hormone is released and sodium stays in the body. Second one is chloride. Chloride is an anion, or it has a negative charge. Chloride is regulated by Na or sodium because a cation attracts an anion. They're opposite. One's a positive, one's a negative. Opposite charges attract one another like a magnet. Wherever sodium is going to go, whatever happens to sodium is going to directly affect chloride. Third is potassium. Remember, potassium is higher levels inside the cell. Remember also, it's very important in action potentials caused by a resting membrane potential change. So remember, potassium is really important in that. Regulated by the sodium-potassium pump with changes needed to maintain homeostasis. Potassium regulation is regulated by the hormone aldosterone. Aldosterone increases potassium secretion by distal kidney tubules. That's not steps 1, 2, or 3. This is just in case we need to move potassium ions. Oh, I missed one, and I'm going to add it here. So after potassium, let's add calcium. My bad, I didn't include it. So calcium levels must be maintained in the extracellular fluid. This is regulated by a few things. Calcium levels are obviously regulated by the kidneys. They're also regulated by bone mineral storage. Remember, long bones store calcium and phosphate. Regulation of calcium is done by the digestive tract. There are 3 things or hormones involved with that calcium regulation, that movement to where it needs to be. One is parathyroid hormone. Remember, parathyroid hormone is released when calcium is low. The second hormone is calcitonin. Remember, that was involved with that negative feedback with parathyroid. Calcitonin is released when calcium is high, and you remember how it's moved. The third thing you might not know, but vitamin D is also a regulator of calcium. It is needed to move calcium to be absorbed by the digestive tract. Okay? Magnesium is another ion that needs to be magnesium is always maintained at very low levels. About 1% in the extracellular fluid is found. And magnesium is important for the sodium-potassium pumped again. Again, kidney is going to control the levels of magnesium, whether it's released through the urine or maintained within blood volume. And the last one is phosphate regulation. It's mostly found as calcium salt, phosphate. Okay? It's stored in your teeth and in your bones. Remember, I already said that, that's a mineral storage. Most phosphate will bind with an organic molecule like lipids, like a carbohydrate, like a protein. Phosphate is really important as a buffer. It's also important to control enzymes and what they do, their functionality. And it also, phosphate is required with DNA, RNA synthesis and production of ATP. And again, like everything else, one of the standard answers is going to be kidneys are going to regulate it. Okay, regulation of acid-base balance. Remember, this is homeostasis-based. It's a stimulus response. And it is also negative feedback. And again, remember, I've talked about this in chapter 26 when we talked about urination. Okay, so again, let me start this out. If pH is high, so the first one is pH high. So if pH is high, three things are going to be involved. We've got kidney, lungs, and buffers. So I'm going to put kidney, lungs, and buffer. So the kidneys will decrease protons or H plus or hydrogens in the urine. Remember, hydrogens is what makes things acidic. So pH is high. That means it's basic. We need to do the opposite. Means we need to bring the pH down. So if we reduce the amount of hydrogens in the urine, that means it's put back in blood circulation. That's going to change the pH and bring it down. Also, the kidneys are going to put bicarbonate, HCO3. They're going to put the bicarbonate into the blood. So again, there's a buffer being added into the blood. The lungs, okay, I'm just going to do it this way. Kidneys, H plus, and HCO3. Okay, lungs, what they're going to do in response is they're going to decrease respiration. When I decrease respiration, I'm increasing the amount of CO2 in there. I know, the writing's terrible, but you'll have to get used to it. Decrease. Okay, so the lungs are going to decrease respiration, which increases the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood, and you know that acts as a buffer, making bicarbonate ions, again bringing the pH down. And then buffers are released to also bring that pH down. Now the opposite is if pH is low. It's acidic, right? Same thing, we're going to get kidneys, lungs, and of course, buffers. Okay, the kidney is going to do the opposite. So remember, when the pH was high, hydrogen ions were not released in the urine. It lowered the amount, so they're kept in blood volume. So pH is low, we need to increase hydrogen ions in urine. So we're taking out what makes something acidic out and putting it through the urine. Also, in the lungs, well, we decrease respiration to bring down the pH to more normal. We're going to increase respiration, which causes CO2 to drop. And you can see how this is a negative feedback. Okay. Last but not least, very simple, and I know I talked about it in 26, so I'm just going to touch on it. Acidosis, alkalosis. Acidosis means that it's more acidic. Acidosis means that the pH is below 7.35. This can cause your nervous system to misfire, like not produce movement, let's just say, or overstimulate movement. So it misfires. And this can be acidosis both respiratory or metabolically. Okay? Either way, the lungs and kidneys are going to be compromised. Alkalosis just means the pH is above, say, 7.45. Again, it can be respiratory or metabolic. And again, it's going to be your respiratory and renal systems, so your lungs and kidneys that get involved to counteract it. Both are extremely dangerous. Now, this was an extremely short, quick chapter, only 9 slides, which means then we're almost done with this and we're going to go into a much larger chapter to be on the end. So make sure you understand 26 in correlation with 27. They go hand in hand, and I touched on chapter 27 in the urinary system PowerPoint.